7,000 years ago, human populations were expanding across fertile river valleys and hillsides, clearing forests for wheat fields and building the first permanent villages. Women were bearing children at unprecedented rates, filling these settlements with the next generation. But their sons were disappearing from history, vanishing so completely from the gene pool that today, most men descend from just a handful of survivors. Geneticists discovered this demographic catastrophe buried in our DNA, a molecular record of the most systematic elimination of male lineages our species has ever experienced. The evidence points to something darker than plague or famine, organized violence, where entire bloodlines were erased in a single generation. In laboratories across the world, geneticists studying human ancestry expected to find two parallel stories. They analyzed DNA from thousands of people, tracing both maternal and paternal lineages backward through time. The maternal story unfolded exactly as predicted. Starting around 8,000 years ago, during humanity's transition to farming, the number of women successfully reproducing began climbing steadily. Female genetic diversity expanded in waves across continents as populations grew and spread. The paternal story told the opposite tale. Beginning around 7,000 years ago, male genetic diversity crashed. The decline was so severe that it suggested a demographic catastrophe affecting only men. For every 17 women who successfully passed their genes to the next generation, genetic analysis indicated that only one man did the same. This represented the near extinction of male lineages across vast regions of the world. The pattern defied every known mechanism of population change. Diseases, famines, and natural disasters affect both sexes. War kills men disproportionately, but not at rates that would create a 17-to-1 reproductive imbalance. Climate catastrophes might devastate entire regions, but they don't selectively eliminate male genetic lines while leaving female lines intact and growing. Something was systematically preventing men from reproducing, while women's reproductive success soared. The genetic signature was unmistakable, a bottleneck so severe that vast numbers of male bloodlines had been permanently erased from human ancestry. Scientists had discovered evidence of the largest demographic filtering event in recorded human history, hidden in the very structure of our DNA. Human cells carry two separate genetic archives that record ancestry through different pathways. Mitochondrial DNA, housed in the energy-producing organelles of every cell, passes exclusively from mother to child. This creates an unbroken chain of female inheritance stretching back through generations. The Y chromosome, present only in males, transfers solely from father to son, preserving a parallel record of paternal lineages. These two genetic systems accumulate mutations at predictable rates, creating molecular clocks that measure the passage of time. By comparing the diversity of mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomes in modern populations, geneticists can estimate how many men and women were successfully reproducing at different points in the past. Greater genetic diversity indicates larger breeding populations. Reduced diversity points to population bottlenecks. The mitochondrial evidence painted a picture of steady female population growth throughout the Neolithic period. Women's genetic diversity increased as farming communities expanded, supporting larger families and more successful reproduction. The archaeological record supported this story, where Neolithic settlements grew larger and more numerous as agriculture spread. Y chromosome analysis revealed a drastically different pattern. Male genetic diversity plummeted beginning around 7,000 years ago and remained suppressed for approximately 2,000 years. The effective male breeding population appeared to collapse to a tiny fraction of its former size, while female populations continued expanding, creating the 17-to-1 ratio that stunned researchers. The genetic data ruled out random catastrophes or gradual population decline. Whatever caused this bottleneck specifically targeted male reproduction, while leaving female reproduction unaffected or even enhanced. The molecular evidence was pointing toward something, a systematic elimination of competing male lineages, coupled with the preservation and redistribution of female genetic diversity. Geneticists had uncovered the signature of organized violence, operating on a scale that dwarfed anything in recorded history. The human Y chromosome carried scars of a prehistoric holocaust that had nearly erased male genetic diversity from entire continents. Genetic studies indicate a widespread male-specific bottleneck in Y chromosome diversity between approximately 7 to 5,000 years ago, whereas mitochondrial DNA diversity continued to expand. In other words, male lineages were dramatically pruned, yet women's genetic diversity blossomed. This pattern appears across multiple Old World regions tested to date, which include Europe, the Middle East, parts of North Africa, and Asia, yet is not confined to a single locale, pointing to a shared social mechanism instead. In Europe, the bottleneck broadly overlapped the spread and consolidation of Neolithic farming communities, roughly timed between 6,000 and 5,000 BC. From the Mediterranean coast to Scandinavia, male genetic diversity plummeted as agricultural settlements replaced hunter-gatherer societies. The timing aligned precisely with the archaeological evidence of increasing violence and social stratification in early farming communities. In the Middle East, where agriculture first emerged, the timing fits as well. Settlements grew in the Fertile Crescent between 9,000 and 7,000 BC, and competition over river valleys intensified thereafter. While regional genetic data are less fine-grained, the bottleneck in male effective population size occurs during these centuries of agricultural intensification, hinting at a plausible scenario for patrilineal dominance and lineage. North African and Asian populations exhibited parallel demographic signatures. Male lineages collapsed while female lineages proliferated, creating the same stark imbalance between paternal and maternal genetic diversity. The global scope of this phenomenon suggested a common cause tied to fundamental changes in human social organization, rather than localized conflicts or disasters. The synchronicity was striking. Across thousands of miles and different cultures, human societies were experiencing the same demographic transformation. Male genetic diversity was being systematically pruned while female genetic diversity expanded and redistributed. This is evidence of a new form of social organization that emerged alongside agriculture and spread with devastating consequences for male lineages. The genetic data revealed that the transition to farming had triggered the most severe filtering of human genetic diversity in our species' history. Whatever social and economic changes accompanied agriculture had transformed human reproduction from a relatively egalitarian process into a winner-takes-all competition where the vast majority of male lineages were eliminated. Archaeological excavations across Neolithic Europe began uncovering physical evidence that corroborated the genetic story of systematic violence. Mass graves from this period revealed organized massacres targeting entire communities, with victim patterns that matched the demographic collapse recorded in Y chromosome data. The Talheim death pit in Germany, dating to around 5000 BCE, contained the remains of 34 individuals hastily thrown into a pit. Many skulls bore fatal blows from stone adzes, tools normally used for woodworking but here wielded as weapons. Several injuries suggested the victims had been struck from behind, consistent with a sudden raid or pursuit rather than pitched combat. The demographic composition of the Talheim victims was telling. The grave contained men, women, and children, representing what appeared to be an extended family or small community. Notably absent were young adult women of reproductive age. This absence suggested selective killing, where the attackers had spared and likely captured the most reproductively valuable members of the defeated group. The Schöneck-Kilienstätten site provided even more disturbing evidence of systematic violence. 26 victims showed not only fatal head trauma, but also deliberately broken leg bones inflicted either just before or after death. This shows the ritualized brutality designed to terrorize or prevent escape. The victims were primarily adult men and children, with young women again conspicuously absent from the grave. Similar sites revealed the same pattern of organized violence and selective killing. At Asparni Schletz in Austria, circa 5200 BCE, at least 67 people were killed, many with skull fractures and arrow wounds. At Herxheim in Germany, circa 5300 BCE, hundreds of bodies were deposited, some showing evidence of violent death and possible ritual dismemberment. Together, these mass graves provide archaeological snapshots of the violence hinted at by genetic evidence. They suggest that Neolithic communities engaged in total warfare aimed not just at defeating rivals, but at erasing their lineage. By killing men and children while capturing women, aggressors could both extinguish competing paternal lines and absorb reproductive capacity, an echo of the severe Y-chromosome bottleneck now visible in ancient DNA. The agricultural revolution that began around 12,000 years ago fundamentally transformed human society in ways that greatly increased the likelihood of large-scale lineage warfare. For the first time in human history, survival depended on controlling specific pieces of land rather than moving freely across the landscape in search of resources. Farming created heritable wealth in the form of cleared fields, grain stores, and domesticated animals. Unlike the portable tools and temporary shelters of hunter-gatherers, agricultural resources were fixed investments that could be accumulated, defended, and passed down through generations. Archaeological finds from Neolithic villages in the Fertile Crescent and early European farming sites, such as the linear band ceramic culture around 5500 BCE, show clear signs of this permanent wealth. These changes created powerful incentives for groups to maintain exclusive control over their productive land, and equally powerful motivations for others to take it by force. Population density increased dramatically as farming communities could support far more people per square mile than hunting and gathering societies. River valleys and fertile plains that once sustained scattered bands of foragers now hosted dense settlements competing for the same prime agricultural land. The Nile, Tigris-Euphrates, Indus, and Yellow River valleys all show evidence of this transformation, where formerly mobile groups became neighbors living within raiding distance, sometimes fortifying their villages against attack. The social organization necessary for successful farming favored patrilineal kinship systems, where descent, identity, and inheritance flowed through male lines. Sons who worked their father's land logically inherited it, creating extended patrilineal clans with shared economic interests. Women typically married into these groups, joining their husband's patrilineal kin rather than remaining with their birth families. This patrilineal structure produced villages and regions populated by closely related men, fathers, sons, brothers, and cousins, who shared not only genetic ancestry, but economic stakes in defending their collective property. Ancient DNA studies of Neolithic cemeteries in Central Europe, for example, reveal groups of related males buried together, reflecting kin-based communities. The women in these communities were often outsiders who had married in from other groups, creating a fundamental asymmetry in kinship loyalties. These conditions created perfect storms for the kind of violence that would systematically eliminate male lineages. Patrilineal clans had both the social cohesion necessary for coordinated warfare and existential reasons to completely destroy competing groups rather than simply defeat them. Patrilineal clan warfare operated according to a brutal logic that explained both the scale and selectivity of the genetic bottleneck. When these kinship groups went to war, they weren't fighting for temporary advantage. They were competing for permanent control over the resources necessary for their descendants' survival. A successful raid aimed to eliminate competition. Attacking clans would kill all the men and boys of rival groups, permanently erasing their Y-chromosome lineages from the gene pool. Children were targeted because they represented the future reproductive potential of the enemy lineage. By eliminating males of all ages, attackers ensured that no member of the defeated group could ever continue their genetic line. Women of reproductive age, however, were valuable prizes rather than threats. They could bear children for the victorious clan, contributing their mitochondrial DNA lineages to the winning group, while their original male lineages vanished forever. This practice explained why mass graves consistently showed deficits of young women, because they were being systematically captured and absorbed into victorious communities. abilities. The genetic consequences of this warfare pattern were exactly what researchers had detected in DNA analysis. Female lineages continued and even proliferated as captured women were distributed among successful clans. Male lineages, by contrast, were subject to complete elimination of either a patrilineal clan that succeeded in warfare and expanded its Y chromosome lineage, or being destroyed, causing the male genetic line to end permanently. This created powerful positive feedback loops. Clans that were successful in warfare acquired more land, livestock, and women, enabling them to support larger populations and field more warriors in subsequent conflicts. Their Y chromosome lineages expanded rapidly as successful patrilineal groups out-reproduced their competitors. Meanwhile, thousands of less successful lineages were pruned from the human family tree through systematic elimination. The Y chromosome itself wasn't responsible for military success, as it was simply hitchhiking along with the cultural and technological advantages that made certain clans more effective at warfare. Successful warrior cultures carried their specific Y chromosome lineages to dominance not through genetic superiority, but through superior organization, weapons, tactics, or simple luck in early conflicts. Around 5,000 years ago, the demographic bottleneck that had suppressed male genetic diversity for 2 millennia began to reverse. Y chromosome lineages started diversifying rapidly as the social and technological conditions that had enabled systematic lineage warfare gradually changed. The rise of metallurgy fundamentally altered the nature of conflict. Copperworking had already begun in parts of the Near East by around 5000 BCE, but it was the advent of the Bronze Age that began around 3300 BCE in Mesopotamia and later spread into Europe by 3000 to 2500 BCE that transformed warfare. Bronze weapons required specialized knowledge and access to trade networks for tin and copper, giving elites the power to control their production and distribution. This shift laid the groundwork for more organized military hierarchies, where warriors increasingly fought under leaders who controlled resources rather than under simple kinship ties. Settlement sizes grew dramatically during this period, creating larger political units that transcended individual clans. These emerging chiefdoms and early states developed legal systems and conflict resolution mechanisms that provided alternatives to total warfare. Disputes could be resolved through compensation, negotiation, or ritualized combat, rather than the complete elimination of losing groups. Trade networks also expanded as communities specialized in crafts, metallurgy, and agricultural products. By 3000 BCE, long-distance trade connected Mesopotamia with the Indus Valley and Egypt, while in Europe, the bell beaker culture in circa 2800 to 1800 BCE spread metalworking, pottery, and exchange networks. These growing interdependencies created incentives for maintaining peaceful relations with neighbors, since the benefits of commerce increasingly outweighed the advantages of raiding. The scale of social organization grew beyond the patrilineal clan. Larger political entities could offer protection to smaller groups in exchange for tribute or military service, reducing the existential pressures that had made lineage warfare necessary for survival. Men could achieve reproductive success through economic specialization, trade, or service to powerful leaders rather than solely through success in clan-based warfare. These changes allowed the few Y chromosome lineages that had survived the bottleneck to diversify rapidly. Male genetic diversity began recovering as social systems developed that could support multiple successful reproductive strategies rather than the winner-takes-all competition that had characterized early farming societies. The rebound was dramatic but incomplete. The genetic landscape had been permanently altered by 2,000 years of systematic lineage elimination. Most of the Y chromosome diversity that existed before the bottleneck was gone forever, replaced by the expanded descendants of a relatively small number of successful warrior lineages. The genetic legacy of the Neolithic bottleneck shapes the ancestry of men across the globe today. Single Y chromosome lineages that survived the period of systematic warfare subsequently expanded to dominate entire regions, creating the modern pattern of male genetic diversity. The paternal lineage called haplogroup R1b, which expanded rapidly during the Bronze Age after 3000 BCE, now reaches frequencies of around 70% in southern England and over 90% in parts of Ireland and the Basque region of Spain. This lineage, carried by tens of millions of men across Western Europe, represents the genetic signature of whatever cultural group successfully navigated the violent transition to agricultural society. Similar patterns appear worldwide. In East Asia, haplogroup O3 dominates across Han Chinese populations, while O1 and O2 prevail in Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. In Africa, lineages of haplogroup E, particularly E1b1a, reach extremely high frequencies across sub-Saharan Africa. Each of these dominant Y chromosome types represents a founding lineage that survived the agricultural transition and expanded to replace most competing male lines in its region. The contrast with mitochondrial DNA diversity remains stark. Female lineages preserved far more genetic diversity from pre-agricultural populations because women were often captured and integrated into victorious groups rather than eliminated alongside their male relatives. As a result, modern populations carry a rich mixture of ancient maternal lineages, even as the paternal genetic landscape was reshaped by prehistoric violence. This genetic inheritance reveals that most men alive today descend from a remarkably small number of successful patrilineal groups that lived during the early agricultural period. The vast majority of male lineages that existed before farming were eliminated during the demographic bottleneck, their genetic contributions erased by systematic violence. The scale of this prehistoric filtering exceeds any demographic catastrophe in recorded history. No plague, famine, or war has ever approached the genetic impact of the Neolithic Y chromosome bottleneck. It represents the most severe demographic filtering event in human evolutionary history, accomplished not by natural selection, but by cultural and social forces that emerged alongside agriculture. Understanding this hidden chapter of human history provides crucial insights into the origins of inequality, violence, and social organization in agricultural societies. The genetic evidence reveals that the transition to farming wasn't a peaceful evolution toward greater prosperity and security, but a brutal competition that eliminated most existing human lineages and established the genetic foundation of modern populations through systematic warfare. The Y chromosomes carried by billions of men today are the molecular monuments to prehistoric survivors whose descendants inherited a world built on the elimination of their competitors. Every man reading this carries in his cells the genetic signature of that ancient violence. Your Y chromosome didn't reach you through random chance or natural selection. It survived because your patrilineal ancestors were better at systematic warfare than thousands of competing lineages that no longer exist. The peaceful farming villages we imagine from our agricultural origins were built on the foundations of unprecedented demographic carnage. We like to think civilization emerged from cooperation and mutual aid, but our DNA tells a different story. It whispers of a time when human reproduction became a zero-sum game, and only the most ruthless players passed their genes forward. In the end, we are all descendants of winners in a contest most of us never knew was fought.